Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Some massive news for the Penn State fans coming out of the transfer portal as a name that we've talked a lot about in terms of Penn State. Wide receiver Julian Fleming commits to Penn State, and we've talked about this for the last couple of weeks. And the lack of talent and difference makers in this wide receiver room was a massive problem for Penn State in that 2023 season, and it's going to get better with a guy like Julian Fleming, who I think has the ability to come in and be that true wide receiver one in that Penn State offense. And the narrative you might get about Julian Fleming was a former five-star prospect that did not kind of achieve expectations that were set out from him coming out of high school at Ohio State. And although that might be partially true, I don't think it's as much of a knock of the player Julian Fleming is. And as a Michigan fan, as Penn State fans listening, we've seen Julian Fleming make plays against our team. This is a wide receiver with a ton of talent. I would probably make the argument that Julian Fleming wasn't as productive at Ohio State from a box score standpoint because he was in a wide receiver room with guys like Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson and Jackson Smith-Njigba, Marvin Harrison Jr. It has been a loaded wide receiver room for Ohio State, kind of causing Julian Fleming to not be a centerpiece in that Ohio State offense. Him coming to Penn State, I think he's the immediate wide receiver one. He's going to be a focal part of this offense and could provide that difference maker in this Penn State wide receiver room that Penn State so desperately needed. And James Franklin talked about after that Ole Miss game. Massive get. Want to talk Julian Fleming, what to expect from Julian Fleming, and then talk about a few other targets for Penn State in that wide receiver room in the transfer portal. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys. And it truly has been a blast talking the transfer portal, evaluating all these additions. Julian Fleming, a guy that we've talked extensively in connection to Penn State. Cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with the boys. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into Julian Fleming, talk a little bit about what he brings to this Penn State offense. And I think the first thing you want to talk about, and we talked about this a couple days in terms of Penn State in their overarching goal in the transfer portal, was to surround Drew Aller heading into 2024 with the talent that he needs. And we talked about this the other day. 3 of the top 4 pass catchers for Penn State in terms of receiving yards were a running back and 2 tight ends. And Keandre Lambert-Smith was the only wide receiver to catch for over 250 yards for Penn State in 2023. That kind of tells you the lack of juice that Penn State had in this wide receiver room, and it needed to get addressed, right? Drew Aller, you talk about Penn State closing the gap between teams like Michigan and Ohio State. It has nothing to do with the defense that we saw from Penn State. And as a Michigan fan, I'd even go as far and say Penn State defense might be the best defense that we saw in the country in that 2023 season. That's how good that Penn State unit is, and that's how good it's probably going to be next year as well. You look at Penn State in terms of closing the gap and taking that step, it has to do with this offense and, more importantly, finding some explosiveness in this passing attack and starting with having that true wide receiver one. Now, does Drew Aller need to take steps in terms of his quarterback play? 100% agree. That being said, there needed to be an injection of talent in this wide receiver room, and now you have it with Julian Fleming, and more importantly, you have a guy in Coach Koldenicki coming in who averages 10.1 yards per pass attempt at Kansas last year as their offensive coordinator. So you're getting a new offensive scheme, which was much needed from Penn State. I mean, how many tunnel screens can you possibly see? And then secondly, you're adding the talent. And for Penn State fans, when you combine a good scheme with the talent, that is what excites you the most. And a guy like Drew Aller, although had some growing pains in 2023, there is no doubt in any of our minds that he has the arm talent and the capability of being an elite quarterback at the Big Ten level. And that's what he was coming out of high school. You saw flashes of it in his second year of college football this year. So I want to talk a little Julian Fleming, kind of what to expect now. Through his 4 seasons at Ohio State, 79 catches for only 963 yards, 7 touchdowns. But as a Michigan fan who've watched a lot of Ohio State, and I'm sure Penn State fans listening, you've seen Julian Fleming flash that top 5 national prospect potential. You're getting a wide receiver that has a big body, extremely, extremely good movement skills, and very explosive. And so when you combine the frame that he has at 6'2", 210 pounds with the explosiveness that he brings to the table, that's what you get for a wide receiver one. That kind of is the makeup of a true wide receiver one. And you look at that Penn State wide receiver room in 2023, there wasn't really a true wide receiver one. I mean, Keandre Lambert-Smith played solid, but I don't think Penn State fans would want him to be the wide receiver one heading into 2024. And you look at when this Penn State offense is cooking and when this Penn State offense has had its most success, they've had those true wide receiver ones, right? A guy like Jahan Dotson, I'd even argue Parker Washington was a guy, KJ Hamler. You kind of need those guys. And I think Julian Fleming can be that true wide receiver one in that Penn State offense. Now, taking a look at some other directions James Franklin could go. I think Julian Fleming is a great start, but I think for a lot of Penn State fans, especially with a guy like Cephas hitting the portal early this morning, probably as a result of hearing the news Julian Fleming committed, you probably want to add more options in this wide receiver room. The next guy I want to talk about that I think should, one, for sure be on Penn State's radar, and two, makes a lot of sense coming from Maryland, a area that Penn State has done a very good job recruiting, is Elijah Surratt. He goes 82 catches for over 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns for James Madison last year, and another big physical frame for Penn State to work around, right? 6'3", 207 pounds. The stat that I love the most, there's two. One, when he was targeted at JMU, an 82% completion percentage. Right, we're looking to up Drew Allar's completion percentage. It's normally a good number when you see a wide receiver have their quarterback have so much success when they look their way. And Elijah Surratt was peppered with targets at JMU and caught a lot of them. Again, 82%, a very high number. And then the next number that we've talked about is first down catches, right? Penn State, when they're dealt with that third and long situation, they didn't have that guy that they could rely on to move the chains. Elijah Surratt was the guy in that JMU offense. In terms of 3rd and 6, we need a guy that has a big frame that can create separation and can kind of use that frame to make a contested catch in a tight window on a 3rd and long. Elijah Surratt was him. And so he comes to this Penn State offense. I think he could be another weapon for Drew Aller, who loves to work down the field. He has the arm to do it. Elijah Surratt would be a massive target for Drew Aller heading into 2024. The last name I want to bring up is a guy that just hit the transfer portal the other day. And when he popped, I said, this would be a great fit in this Penn State offense, specifically for what Coach Koldnicki wants to do. And that's Kevin Coleman transferring from Louisville, and now another top 100 national prospect coming out of that 2022 class. Kevin Coleman is elite with the football in his hands. Now, he doesn't have the frame and the size that a Julian Fleming or Elijah Surratt does, but he's a guy that when you get to the football to him in space, he has the ability to make a massive play with his legs. And those yards after the catch, especially in a Coach Koldnicki-led offense, is huge because you look at what Coach Koldnicki is bringing to this Penn State team, you're going to see more space, right? When you look back at that Penn State offense, it just seemed really congested. There didn't seem like they were operating and making a defense defend all the blades of grass on the football field. That is pretty much the complete opposite of what Kansas's offensive coordinator, Coach Koldnicki, is bringing to this Penn State offense. They're going to operate in space. This offense is going to be predicated on getting playmakers the football in space and letting them do work, right? Kaytron Allen, Nick Singleton, I think are great fits at the running back spot with what they can do out of the backfield. But a guy like Kevin Coleman, in terms of being a phenomenal special teams punt and kick returner, I think can also bring that. And he has elite wheels to work vertically as well. He can be a target that can stretch the field as well. If you're James Franklin, kind of going back to how we started, I think the biggest goal and objective is to revolutionize this offense and put the pieces in place for Drew Aller to have a successful 2024 year, because we saw the potential. You bring in a new offensive scheme with Coach Koldnicki. Now you got to bring in the personnel to match it. Julian Fleming, a phenomenal start. Would love to see Penn State continue to get active, and we've seen them get active. They've sent offers out to a lot of wide receivers in the transfer portal. I have a feeling this isn't going to be the last one for James Franklin in this Penn State program. Kevin Coleman, Elijah Surratt, two names that I would 100% keep an eye on. Penn State fans, appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.